what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Tesseract. This is episode number 5 with Mark Sokol. Welcome to the room, Mark. Appreciate everybody being here. We're really excited to host you. A brief introduction to Mark. Mark Sokol is an independent researcher and the founder of Falcon Space, a self-funded effort to recreate a variety of breakthrough propulsion experiments focused on scientific accuracy and reproducibility. With years of hands-on technical experience in the hybrid vehicle battery sector, Mark has applied his knowledge and love of engineering to the realm of alternative propulsion and gravity modification in an attempt to fully explore the many reported experimental claims currently in existence. Thank you, Mark, for joining us. It's truly an honor to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Great to be back.
So, Josh, you want to kick it off?
Sure. So, Mark, thanks for being here. And I have a question about propulsion in general. So, what kind of propulsion concepts you think that you were trying to work on that would be maybe a bit different than what's out there, and how to apply it?
Okay, so when you think of propulsion, you're normally thinking of pushing one thing out one side and the object moves in the other. You know, sort of like the law of inertia. Push something in one direction, everything goes in the other direction. For every action, there's an opposite and an equal reaction. That's how rockets work. And even when your car is rotating its tires against the ground, it's pushing against the ground. You're pushing against the earth in order to move the car forward. You normally don't think of it as pushing something back, but it's pushing the entire planet back in order for the car to move forward. So every form of propulsion that we have today has some sort of give and take where it's pushing one thing in one direction and you're moving in the other direction. And what we see with these flying saucers is something that obviously does not obey that law, because these objects are accelerating at crazy high velocities, and yet there's no blowback. There's no exhaust coming out of it. It can be hovering a couple feet off the ground and suddenly shoot off into the stratosphere. And if that was a helicopter, let's say, or a rocket engine, or any other propulsion system that we're familiar with, the dust cloud that would have been blown up from such an acceleration would have been humongous. And that's not even considering the inertial impact of such maneuvers on the crew. So something has to be taking place inside these flying saucers, UFOs, UAPs, whatever they are, that negates that effect and allows them to accelerate so quickly and do those 90-degree turns at 10,000 miles an hour. And those are the kind of things that we're looking at. Just to give you some examples, one experiment is called the Alciphon experiment. It involves electron paramagnetic resonance, which is a form of nuclear. It's a nuclear effect that comes about when you reach certain resonances with the atom and a magnetic field. It's a combination of a magnetic field and a RF field combined together. You're able to manipulate certain parts of the atom. And through this, we're trying to achieve an effect called dynamic nuclear orientation, where the subatomic particles, the protons and neutrons in the core of the atom, their spins are being oriented. And when we do that, we believe there's a possibility that will negate the effects of inertial mass and allow us to do those 90-degree turns at 10,000 miles an hour. Just to explain that quickly and in layman's terms, matter is energy equals mc squared, right? And when you look at matter itself, you see the subatomic particles. That's where all the atom That's where all the energy, the mass of the atom is stored all in the core of it. The electrons in the outside sort of dictate its properties, what it will bond with, the covalent bonds and the ionic bonds that it will have, and the color and all that stuff. But the core of the atom, that's where the mass is stored. So, but all the mass is these electromagnetic energies that are spinning around on themselves. So how does that actually become mass? Because electromagnetic energy isn't really mass, it's just energy, and energy is the movement of mass. So where does the mass actually come from? So we were theorizing that it comes from the spins of those subatomic particles. There's many complex spins that are happening one on top of another. So like it could be rotating around just like a gyroscope, but then there's a wobble on top of that. That is called a precession. There can be several layers of precessions that are happening one on top of another, a very complex spin. Now, if you were to take something that's wobbling like that in so many different directions and move it through space-time, inevitably, because of what you just did, moving it through space-time, you'll be changing the characteristics of its wobble. And in doing so, we believe that's where you're imparting the inertial mass to the core of the atom. And that's why we feel these effects. That's why when you take a baseball and throw it, you feel the resistance to acceleration. And that energy, as the ball is going through the air, is being stored in the subatomic particle spins of every atom that make up that baseball. And when the batter hits it, the reverse happens, and the energy from the bat gets transferred to the ball. But ultimately, what's happening is subatomic particle spins are changing to allow for that energy to be transferred over. And by orienting all the subatomic particle spins, what you would be doing is you'd free it from the effects of inertial mass, because just like a gyroscope is free to move along its plane and its axes without any restriction, it's the same thing we sing with these flying saucers. They're flying around, able to do a 90-degree turn at 10,000 miles an hour, but they're not able to change their orientation too rapidly, which is why a lot of the sightings that have been seen are of saucers slowly changing their orientation before they shoot off at a crazy speed, because that's what they have to do slowly. Because let's say the craft weighs the equivalent of 10 tons before the effect is turned on. That's the amount of mass, that inertia that they need to manipulate before it can reorient its orientation. But along its plane and axes, it's almost zero, and that allows them to do those 90-degree turns at 10,000 miles an hour without any of those inertial effects getting squashed against the walls of the craft or something like that. There's many other effects that we're looking into. Warp fields, for instance. I don't know if you guys are familiar with there's like these sonic experiments where they can get like a little pellet of styrofoam to float in the air by pressure waves of sound and the way the sound combines. So a similar concept is what we're trying to do with electromagnetic waves, by getting them to build up energy in space outside of the craft. You're able to change the permittivity and permeability of space-time, mu and epsilon, and you're able to create like a gradient pressure of either a magnetic or a static electric field that is stuck on space-time, allowing the craft to either attract or push away from it. And that's a concept of an Alcubierre drive, but the difference is that instead of using negative mass, all we're doing is using RF energy, regular, the regular stuff that you use for all our RF transmissions, except that we're making them extremely coherent and that they're tuned precisely so that a buildup of energy happens in one spot, because the RF energy is moving out at the speed of light. If you have it tuned precisely, you're able to get the dip in the same spot in space-time, building up, let's say, a foot away from the craft. And if you keep on building that up, eventually you'll have something that can push or pull against the craft. And we've seen these effects in several labs, and they do work. It's mostly a problem of tuning. It's very difficult to tune them. Another experiment we're working on is the same thing, same concept, just doing it with sound. There's also some experiments that involve parallel plate capacitors that are said to have made some thrust. The issue with those experiments that I'm looking into right now is that, yes, they do produce thrust. The problem is, how do we distinguish that from the effects of ionic wind? And for that, we need a very good vacuum chamber that is both non-metallic, so able to withstand a very strong, a very good vacuum, so that the effects of ionic wind can be ruled out. But in a nutshell, those are the experiments we're currently working on. There's also some thermoelectric conversion devices, and we've also been working with gyroscopes, trying to complex gyroscopic spins, trying to convert angular momentum into linear motion. I hope that answers your question.
Definitely. That was. Thank you for that response. That was extremely detailed. I'm sure we're all going to have to ruminate on that for a bit. But I wanted to go ahead and ask you with respect to, because we're fully on board with you. In fact, this is something that we brought up with our previous guests, that the fundamental approach to propulsion that we see from these craft is one that is different from our fundamental approach. Combustion, right? Contained combustion, burning things, expelling waste in the direction that is opposite to the one in which we want to go. That being said, this reveals tremendous gaps between our current understanding of physics and the kind of understanding of physics that would be needed in order to have that sort of propulsion in which mass faces no accelerative experience. So that being said, I would like to ask you your opinion on this question. Is gravity a fundamental force?
Okay, now you're touching on a very touchy subject. I mean, it depends which member of my team you ask and what time of the day it is. Gravity is a mysterious force. It's definitely a fundamental one. What it is exactly, there's a lot of different theories on that and what creates it. I tend to agree with Todd Viciato from Warp Drive Tech. His theory of gravity is that basically all matter is outputting energy constantly, right? Because rotating fields, like if you rotate a magnet around, you're going to be burning off energy. It's going to be the space around it is going to be sucking off energy. So when you have these little electrons and protons and everything, they're spinning around. They're basically a little magnet spinning around. So they are producing some form of radiation. But when you have another set of magnets spinning around next to it, and then another one to the left, to the right, and you have trillions of them or gazillions of them, as in a planet of a whole bunch of mass, and all of these things are emitting the radiation. What happens is the radiation from one gets reduced. The amount that it can push out gets reduced by the atom next to it, because there's interference patterns. So matter and everything in the universe, for instance, wants to go to its lowest energy state. So when matter coalesces, it's at a lower energy state because it can't transmit the amount of energy that it would have been able to if it was in free space, unencumbered by other pieces of mass that want to produce their own fields as well. So that's one way of looking at gravity that I kind of like. The way you look at gravity may affect your experimental path, but ultimately experiments don't lie, and they are the truest way to figure out, the truth of the universe. And one thing that I found very interesting about this Alzaphon experiment with EPR, electron paramagnetic resonance, and dynamic nuclear orientation, is that the heyday for such experiments and such science was in the 50s. And afterwards, it sort of fell off a cliff. Nobody talks about it. Nobody looks into it. Even the top professor for EPR in the tri-state area here in New Jersey, he's up in New York, Professor Keith Earle, he's never worked on dynamic nuclear orientation. The book on it, the textbook, was written in 1963. That's the latest book on dynamic nuclear orientation that you can find is literally from 1963. And it's been in this little corner of science that is underfunded and very secretive, and almost nobody works on it. The equipment that they use for, if you wanted to take an advanced class of this stuff, the equipment is not suitable for running a weight loss experiment in. So it almost feels like there's some sort of scientific cover-up going on there. I do not believe that that this is something that hasn't been discovered. I actually think this was discovered back in the 50s by the military-industrial complex, and it was hidden and covered up. Back then was the heyday of scientific research into these things, and the only thing that ever came out of nuclear spin resonances is the MRI machine, the magnetic resonance imaging machine that you use in hospitals, which is similar, but it's not. It doesn't orient subatomic particles to the degree that EPR can. In fact, it's about 3 or 4 orders of magnitude off. So the results over there, if you weighed yourself inside an NMR machine, would be minuscule, would be almost undetectable. I hope that answers your question.
That's definitely a lot of insight that you just provided, and a lot of fuel for some of our later questions that we'll be asking you. But just on matters of the technical, what role do you think that quantum effects play in this matter? Because, as you mentioned yourself, experiments don't lie. And if we take a look at the results of the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, could you comment on the potential for the utilization of entanglement and wave function collapse with respect to movement, with respect to displacement of mass?
Okay, entanglement. Well, entanglement always exists. Entanglement is actually the status quo. Entanglement is the reason for gravity, and it's the reason for inertia. It's the reason why. It's the reason why we need Newtonian propulsion in order to move around. What we're actually trying to do with dynamic nuclear orientation is disentanglement. We're trying to remove ourselves from the entangled state that we're normally in. And by doing so, if you're able to reach a state where the craft weighs 0 along a certain axis, then E equals mc squared. If m is 0, if the mass is 0, then theoretically there's no limit to how fast it can go. And we believe that some of these craft may be using similar effects to traverse the vastness of the universe in a very short amount of time.
Amazing. Thank you for that answer.
So, when we spoke on the phone, Mark, I brought up the concept that Dr. Kellier and Robert Bigelow has quantified the phenomenon as a whole, coining the term the precognitive sentient phenomenon. And a great example is the craft being able to not only move through space. He got a call. The craft not only able to move through space, but it also seems to be able to operate outside of linear time in a way that is um, I would say unconventional. So, with that being said, is there anything that you might have looked into when it comes to this electrogravitics, anti-gravity research that has any sort of extraordinary effects, not only on space, but also on time?
Yes, there are some experiments that we've looked at that may involve time. In fact, one of them is called Jeremiah's Time Machine, although he doesn't like that name. And the issue has been how do we detect the time dilation? And it's actually on my to-do list is to build a time dilation detector or a chrono clock system. Basically, what we're planning on doing is getting a chip that has, let's say, a 5 megahertz continuous output pulse, and hooking it up with a tiny battery, tiny chip, and a little laser pointer that will pulse at whatever frequency it is. And then we can have a detector outside of the supposed field that will be measuring those laser pulses and be able to tell us, okay, it's no longer at 5 megahertz, now it's at 4.95 megahertz, and we know that we just saw, 2.5% time dilation in that field. So it is something we're looking at. If anyone out here is willing to give us a hand with that particular test setup, that would be great. But right now, I'm still not sure what parts to buy and how to make it work. But the funding is secured for that piece of equipment as soon as we can figure out how to build it.
Wow, congratulations on securing the funding. That's a big deal.
Actually, the big deal has been finding the people and finding the equipment. The money, it has been very helpful, but like I said, we've been doing this from the beginning with almost no budget, and a lot. Some of the best equipment that I've ever received ended up being the stuff that I got for free. But yeah, money definitely helps, and we have funding, and we have people that are helping us out, and we hope to take this full scale and actually build a full size craft one day.
Amazing. That is amazing. I have another follow-up question for you. So there's been a big interest, big peak in interest from, I would say, our own community, as well as the I would say national security community, in regards to the biological acute and subacute field effects from these craft on the human tissue, on human biology. Is there anything that you guys might be looking into to prevent yourselves from being affected biologically speaking, or because I heard a lot of this stuff is still classified, and I would love to hear from you, being hands-on on what you think of the matter.
Yeah, we've been buzzed a couple times by our own equipment. I'll tell you this much: when a microwave, when an RF signal wavelength becomes an appreciable fraction of neuron pathways in your brain, it can cause a very severe headache very quickly. And we're talking particularly about the X-band microwaves. They can really hurt, and that being as what we're working with for the EPR experiment, we had some custom-made Faraday shielded clothing that look very similar to what many people have seen aliens walking out of their craft covered in like a silver overall, silvery kind of cloth. It's the very similar material, made in China, as one would expect, and it's literally like, I think it's like spandex with silver, with actual real silver, pure silver strands put in there as well. And silver being the best conductor of electricity, other than superconductors at room temperature, is a prime material to work with, and it's also very flexible, and it's good for you in many other ways. It kills bacteria. So we made several of these like hoodies, go down to your knees, and when we run certain experiments, we have them on, and they shield us from it. I was sick for a couple of days once after getting a particularly large dose of RF radiation from an experiment that wasn't properly grounded. And you know that it's from that because other people in the room are feeling the same thing. We also have for hard radiation. So just to put this in perspective, RF radiation, we're talking about stuff that your phone puts out, your microwave puts out, antennas put out. Depending on the frequency, they can affect your body. Mostly the higher frequencies can affect your body. The lower frequencies, they're not an appreciable fraction of your body parts, so they're very unlikely to make any effect. But once you get above 8 gigahertz, between 8 and 20 gigahertz, that's like the sweet spot of where you can get hurt. And that's the range that we're working in. Once you go into very high frequencies, the energy starts to act more like a particle. Particles themselves, they're just extremely high frequencies. Like the electron that's spinning around the atom, that's an extremely high frequency right over there that's radiating. We don't even have equipment to measure it. But when you get into those very high frequencies, gamma rays and X-rays, those are like little bits of energy that are flying out, and they could mess up with your DNA and cause cancer. So for those type of experiments, we have half a millimeter lead suits, the kind of stuff that you'll put on when you're going for an X-ray, at the dentist. And we put those on. But most of the experiments we've done do not involve hard X-rays or hard radiation. They're mostly involving just the RF stuff. We also have a large Faraday cage, double shielded, so that it has two separate grounds. The inside ground has an 8-foot rod. The outside ground has a 4-foot rod going into the ground. And we try to run an experiment that we can inside of the Faraday cage while we are on the outside in order to shield us from the effects. There is a well-documented caseload of people who have gone near these craft. Travis Walton is one of the famous cases. He got a little too close and there was lightning or something like that involved, some sort of discharge, and got hurt. But there's a lot of cases of people who got near these craft and got burnt, both in X-ray and different types of radiations. So we thought it best to start with safety first. And one of the first things I did when I was getting serious about this was building that Faraday cage and starting to take the safety precautions necessary. Because if we do it right, it will not be safe to be nearby.
Cool. Thanks for the answer, Mark. I have a second question. What do you think about collaborating with universities, corporations, and governments?
Okay. Well, first, when we talk about governments, it needs a little bit more definition. What is government and who exactly am I working with? In 1973, there was an amendment passed called the Mansfield Amendment, which basically prohibited the use of grants and government funding on anything that would be considered against the mainstream science, or something that goes against the current Einstein and string theory, whatever science was going on at the time. And this has stemmed all interest into anti-gravity propulsion concepts and these alternative ideas that are looking into things that can possibly violate these currently accepted laws of physics. So if they are willing to work with us, we'd be more than happy to work with them as well. Many of the colleges that we've spoken to are just simply not interested, so I'm not going to be spending too much time chasing after them. But you can find individual professors and students who are interested, and that is something that we've been striving at. Professor Kevin Knuth of Albany State University came down here, and he introduced us to his coworker, Keith Earl, who works in the EPR department. And Keith has come down to the lab on several occasions and has worked with us on the Alzavon experiment. So that is an example of collaboration. But I wouldn't say that we're collaborating directly with the university on an official stance. We're collaborating more with the individual scientists. And even they are afraid to get too involved because if anything is seen as quackery, they can lose their credentials. So science is a bit of a cult in terms of like everyone needs to follow the current dogma, and reputation is everything. So, if you worry too much about reputation, you end up getting nothing done. You look at all the last major breakthroughs in science, such as the Wright brothers built a airplane with almost no budget. They were doing it in the back of their bicycle shop. Whereas the Smithsonian, which had all the budget in the world, they had the largest budget to achieve heavier than air flight, failed at that same adventure because they didn't have the open-mindedness that these the Wright brothers had. And in that sense, we're striving to emulate their contribution, because they had their their bicycle shop in the front, and they were building airplanes in the back. Airplanes, as you know, need to be as light as possible, and so do bicycles. So there was a lot of crossover of the equipment. Over here, we have a battery shop, which has since closed down completely, but it started off as a hybrid battery repair shop, and we moved from that to anti-gravity research. So there is a connection there as well. Using AC and DC fields, which is pretty much most of what we have to play with nowadays. And I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. So if there's
Yeah, Prashant, go ahead.
Yes, so thank you for that, Mark. Yes, science is indeed a cult, and it's very I would say almost disrespectful to the spirit of what science is supposed to be, the current state in which it exists right now. But that being said, I did want to ask you what your thoughts are on the sort of transformative effect on society, on our nations, our economies, our culture, that being able to unlock this kind of technology would have. Because as far as in my estimation, it would free us from so much of the burden of movement.
Couple things to consider here. First of all, the F-35, the latest fighter jet from it came out of Lockheed, that will become obsolete because you have a craft that can go faster than it. You can have a craft that can evade it, cheaper and probably easier to build. And so that entire segment of craft will become obsolete. It'll put all the nations of the world on a similar footing. So the U.S. doesn't have that much to gain by disclosure from a military standpoint, because from what I've been researching and from what we've been doing, if we are successful here, this is something that North Korea can put together. This is not something that that convoluted or that complex like the F-35, and yet it outperforms it. Airplanes will become obsolete. And of course, this is not happening overnight or even over the course of a decade. This is going to take a long time for it to happen. But when you have the ability to move cargo so quickly around the world, airplanes will no longer be necessary, and it's possible that long-haul shipping will take a dent as well and be transferred to something else. One industry that I do not anticipate being affected too much is probably the electric car industry. And the reason for that is that these craft, from what we understand, produce radiation. It's not safe to land them in your backyard. In cases where they have landed in people's backyards, there have been, telltale signs of radiation burns and stuff on the ground and plants not growing right or something like that. So it's not going to be something where everyone just has one in their garage and they take off. These are going to be things that you go to a spaceport that's properly shielded, and you go out to the craft in a gangway that's covered in metal, that's properly grounded, and then you go into the craft and you take off. So electric cars are here to stay. Also, what's going to be powering these craft? I wouldn't rely on battery technology. I'm not really sure what the electrical needs are going to be as of yet, but I'd imagine one of the best courses of action would actually be the hydrogen fuel cell, and possibly a hybrid system between a hydrogen fuel cell and a battery to make up for short bursts of energy that are necessary. So we're looking at something similar to the Toyota Mirai powertrain. That's one of those fuel cell vehicles. And one other thing that would be affected greatly by this is world religions, because ultimately, once we have the ability to transverse the universe, the aliens will come by to visit, or the Vulcans, whoever shows up first. And that will affect our religions in untold ways. Probably lead to a lot less church and synagogue attendance. And so those are also things to consider. It's possible this will cause societal unrest, which is why the government, in terms of their disclosure of these technologies or these effects, UFOs and such, has always had this approach of, oh, they're real, but maybe they're not. Like one step forward, two steps back, sort of to give those who believe a pat on the back, and those who don't believe, nudge them towards, hey, maybe it's real, maybe it's not, sort of just playing with people. So eventually they come to the conclusion on their own, and there will never be that big conference where the president just announces, hey, these are real, aliens are here, and everyone goes screaming like it's the end of the world. So in many ways, I do appreciate how the governments of the world are approaching this subject, as not they're taking it seriously, but they're not pushing it down everyone's throat too quickly, so as not to cause mass panic. But they do not have much. The United States, at least, has very little to gain by disclosure. It's mostly smaller countries that have a lot more to gain, and you see that, like, Mexico is a lot more forthcoming with UFO stories, and smaller countries like Canada and countries like that are a lot more forthcoming than the U.S. is. And that's mainly because they have what to gain when the U.S. does not.
There's a bunch of patents that have been filed. The U.S. Navy filed them under Salvador Baez. There's patents for disc-shaped saucers, free energy, gravity generators. In June, this coming June, Dr. Stephen Greer is to go to Washington, D.C. for some sort of a hearing where he's going to be releasing some of these patents and schematics for open source engineers and scientists to have access to in attempts to prototyping, replicating, manufacturing these advanced technologies. Bob Lazar claimed that he had schematics that they were reverse engineering or and I remember a couple years ago when we spoke, not on the record, but on Clubhouse, your thoughts on Lazar's claims behind the schematics that he claimed he was using in regards to element 115 being a key to these gravity generators, these G engines. Do you mind speaking to the patents and to
Sure.
some of those claims and to what Greer is gearing up for?
Okay. Greer is gearing up to send out some publicly available documents to a world that doesn't care. So I'm not really that excited about it. We already have those documents. We actually have equipment here to replicate one of those experiments. And funnily enough, it involves a way to shield oneself from the effects of gravitational mass or inertial mass. And it uses two plates that act both as waveguides and as high voltage static potential between them. So they're both a capacitor and a waveguide at the same time. We have that experiment in the roster of things to build. And we have the requisite equipment to make various shaped saucer shapes over here. We purchased a spin lathe, which allows you to basically make pots and pans and saucer shapes and whatever you want. It all depends on the blink that you have there. It's a piece called the mandrel. And luckily enough, we were able to team up with some local artisans, and we're working on some of those patents now. But by now, I mean like later today, we'll be probably spinning some metal and trying to build some of those parts. As far as Bob Lazar's story in Element 115 and how that all works, to give everyone the rundown, he claims that he was working in this secret facility at S4 near Area 51 and reverse engineering the power plant of this craft that worked off of bombarding element 115 with an extra neutron, turning into element 116, which then became antimatter, and it then converted into electricity via 100% efficient thermoelectric conversion device, and then some field effect from that 115 was then amplified through these amplifiers that look like microwave waveguides to him. The bottom line is I looked on eBay, I looked on Amazon Prime. I even checked the World Wide Web. There's nowhere to buy Element 115. Not available, and it's all sold out. They haven't had any. Yeah, I know Russia manufactured a tiny little bit of it, and it lasted for less than a second. So if there's nowhere to buy it from, and there's nowhere to do anything with it, it sounds to me like a red herring. Like the red herring is it's a distraction. It's a way of forcing you to look for something that isn't there, and you're just going to waste all your time looking for it. So whether he's right or wrong makes no difference, because we don't have element 115. Therefore, I would like to just ignore him and move on with the things that we do have, the abilities that we do have, and try those things first. Go for the low-hanging fruit, because if you're trying to get some of your element 115, you're just going to end up getting nowhere and doing nothing.
100%. 100%. Prashant, you in there?
Yes, I had a question.
Hop on in, bro.
You brought up the cultic nature of the core scientific community, and I believe 100% with you on the fact that progress doesn't come from the core. It doesn't come from the consensus. It comes from the margin. It comes from the fringe. That's always been the case. So just on a personal basis, what is your source of motivation, and how do you go up against what ostensibly is a tremendous beast, the scientific establishment?
I don't see it as I'm going up against the scientific establishment. I see it more as we're just looking into the fringes and we're looking at science experiments. I don't claim to be smarter than all those people, but I do have more equipment than them. So I'm able to run the experiments that they're not. And the reason for that is because I've been looking for this equipment, the entire time. I just try to look at each experiment, try to figure out what is needed to make that happen, concentrate on getting the equipment first, and then figure everything else out later. Most of the scientific community has a lot more education than me. I technically never graduated from high school, even though I never quit school, but I was always going to these ultra-Orthodox Jewish theology schools where we're learning Gemara and Mishnah and all that stuff and Torah. And then I eventually figured out at some point that the only explanation for Judaism was that it's all aliens. It's not talking about God. It's talking about extraterrestrial intervention on planet Earth, and all these sightings of the pillar of fire and smoke that the Jews followed through in the desert. That was a freaking spaceship. The ocean splitting, when they crossed the sea, anti-gravity propulsion, something was going on there that involved some sort of propulsion system. And I made it my life's goal to figure that out. And one of the things that gave me the confidence to believe that I can do it was the fact that I just had a business with the hybrid batteries, where I started off and the equipment to do the job that I needed didn't exist. I had to build it by hand, 3D printing parts, soldering equipment together in order to build it. And I built a machine that ran a business, basically. So I was fairly confident I can crack this. Although there was one other concern, it was that the men in black. Are people going to come after me to try and subvert the work and, shut me up? Like, I've read many stories about that in the past. And I came to the conclusion that they are no longer in charge, and that is because of something that Corey Goode said on Gaia. He was most of Corey Goode's stories with David Wilcock on Cosmic Disclosure. Most of that stuff was, you could take it with a grain of salt. But one thing he said that stuck with me was this meeting that he was at between the Sphere Being Alliance and the Galactic Federation or whatever, that they were shutting down the grand experiment, which is genetic manipulation of planet Earth, because we've come of age. And he claimed that happened. Most importantly, he claimed that meeting happened on December 16th, 2017, which is the same date that the New York Times came out with their article about ATIP, the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program started by Harry Reid, which is basically the Pentagon looking into UFOs again. So the entire subject of UFOs and UAPs and all that stuff got ripped open, not because of a mass sighting over the Senate, or a mass sighting in Phoenix, Arizona, or something like that. It got opened because of a New York Times article, completely uncalled for, by the people. It was just published in several different places simultaneously on the same day. So I thought that wasn't a coincidence. There obviously has been some change higher up, and whoever is next to the bat, trying to figure this stuff out, will be given, will not be perturbed. And far from being perturbed or stopped in any way, we've actually been assisted in some ways by, let's say we needed a certain piece of equipment. I've been searching for it for a while, and then suddenly it shows up. Sandia National Labs, which is basically the government, is basically giving a whole bunch of this stuff away for free on eBay. So it costs almost nothing. And so we ended up buying tons of these RF amplifiers that are not even available for any price and for almost nothing. And we got them here in our lab, and they're part of our everyday experiments with EPR and and different RF effects. So, in a way, I think that now is the time to push this technology forward and figure it out and make a real propulsion system out of it. And one important thing to note is this is not the opportunity of a lifetime. This is the opportunity of a civilization, because anti-gravity propulsion or warp drive or whatever you want to call it cannot be reinvented. You can't. Nobody in this room today can invent an airplane. You can't, because it's already been invented. It's already there. We've all seen them, and most of us has probably flown on them. So you can't reinvent an airplane, but you do have a chance, knowing that there is a technology out there that's missing. You do have a chance now to be a part of the team that can make these craft real. And that's something that you will not get in the next lifetime, and you didn't have in your last. This is a once in a civilization opportunity.
And how can somebody in this room get involved?
Well, it depends what you're good at, and if we can find a job for you. We're located in Hawthorne, New Jersey, although we do have labs throughout the U.S. If you want to get involved, there's probably something we can find for you to do to help out. If you're an HVAC technician and you can help us with installing the air conditioners on the roof, that would take something off my plate, so I'd be able to go be working on the other experiments. And if you're an electrical engineer and you want to get your hands dirty on something, we're taking in people all the time that come down here to help out. The other day, I had some guy call me up out of the blue. He's like, "Oh, I'm a woodworking teacher. I teach it in college in the city. Maybe I can help out." He came down and he was very helpful. So you never know what skills you have that can be useful in an environment like this. Most of the work that we're doing is arts and crafts. That's literally what it comes down to. It's soldering, welding, cutting, shaping, machining, and the experiment part is actually a very small part of it. With experiments, most of what you're doing is just turning a knob. It's getting everything else set up. That was all the work.
Wow, that is amazing. And I highly encourage everybody who's listening to this to reach out to Mark and get involved. This is the opportunity of our civilization. Mark, thanks so much for taking the hour out of your busy schedule and speaking with us here. It really means a lot, and it's truly an honor. Is there anything you would want anybody else, is there anything else you would want anybody to know that you're involved with? Any plugs, projects, books, websites, conferences that you would
yes.
want to promote?
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about our work, you can go to falconspace.org, which right now it's just redirecting to our YouTube channel, but soon there will be a website going up as well. That's falconspace.org, O-R-G. Also, we have a conference called the Alternative Propulsion Engineering Conference. And that's a pet project of mine and Tim Ventura. We basically started this during the pandemic. It's a Zoom conference, and we have various speakers getting up and talking about either projects that they're working on or theories that they have relating to alternative propulsion. And then there's a Q&A session. It's been really nice. We took a couple-month break, and we're restarting it now on June 10th. You can learn more at altpropulsion.com, and you can sign up for the email list and learn more to get involved that way. Just the bottom line is, don't be shy. Reach out if you want to be involved, especially if you're local here in Hawthorne, New Jersey. Most of the work that we have is for people who are local, who can actually come down and help lift whatever and help screw this in or something like that. You'd be surprised about how simple a lot of the tasks that we have are. And like I said, it's mostly arts and crafts.
Well, I know for sure that I'll be reaching out and attempting to contribute in any way I can as a fabricator and as an artisan. So I highly encourage everybody else to do so as well. Mark, thanks again. What a special treat to be able to speak with you, and hope that I hope that you have nothing but extraordinary success in your endeavors. God bless you.
Thank you very much. And thanks for hosting this.
Absolutely. All right, guys. So make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel Tesseract, and we'll catch you guys on the flip side. Take care.